The first time the dragon hatchling screamed, the entire cavern trembled. It wasn't just sound. It was raw, uncontrolled power, echoing through the ancient stone halls of the mountain like a storm trapped underground. Flames burst from its tiny jaws in uneven bursts, scorching the air, melting the edges of crystal pillars, and sending even seasoned dragon keepers retreating in panic. The queen's child, heir to one of the oldest dragon lineages, was supposed to be a symbol of strength and legacy. Instead, it had become something else entirely. Unpredictable, volatile, and dangerously unstable. No dragon dared get close anymore. Not even the queen herself. Queen Seraphira watched from the upper ledge of the cavern. Her massive wings folded tightly against her body, golden eyes filled not with anger, but fear. Not fear for herself, but for her child. The hatchling writhed on the stone floor below, its scales shimmering unevenly, flickering between hues as if struggling to stabilize. Every breath it took came out as either a spark or a sudden blast of heat, and every attempt by the keepers to approach ended the same way. Another burst of panic, another wave of destruction. They say it cannot be controlled. One of the elder dragons had told her quietly. Its fire is wrong, unbalanced. But Seraphira refused to believe that. This was her child. Not a mistake. Not a danger. And yet, she couldn't reach it. Days passed, and the situation only worsened. The hatchling stopped eating. It refused water. It cried, long, piercing cries that shook the cavern and echoed across the mountain range like a warning to the world. The other dragons began to whisper. Some suggested isolation. Others, more extreme, spoke of ending the threat before it grew beyond control. Seraphira silenced them all with a single glare. But their words lingered in the air like poison. That was when the human arrived. No one knew exactly how he had made it past the outer defenses. The dragon territory was not a place for humans. Most never even got close. But somehow this one had. He wasn't armed. He didn't wear armor. Just simple clothes, worn from travel, and a small pack slung over his shoulder. The guards had caught him easily, dragging him before the queen with suspicion and barely restrained hostility. He claims he can help, one of the dragons said, clearly unconvinced. Seraphira studied the human carefully. He looked ordinary. No sign of power, no scent of magic. Just a calm expression and eyes that didn't flinch under the gaze of a dragon queen. You came into a dragon's domain, she said, her voice low and echoing. To offer help? The human nodded. I heard the cries, he said simply. From far away. That's not anger. That's pain. A ripple of unease passed through the gathered dragons. You presume much, one of the elders growled. You know nothing of dragonkind. The human didn't argue. Maybe, he admitted. But I know what it sounds like when something is afraid and alone. Those words struck deeper than any challenge. Seraphira's gaze shifted briefly toward the cavern below, where another cry echoed upward, weaker this time, but more desperate. What is your name, human? She asked. Elias, he replied. The queen considered him for a long moment. Logic told her to refuse. Instinct warned her this was dangerous. But something else, something quieter, more desperate, pushed her to take the risk. If you fail, she said, her voice tightening slightly, you will not leave this mountain. Elias nodded without hesitation. Understood. The guards released him, though none looked pleased about it. As Elias stepped into the lower cavern, the temperature rose immediately, thick with heat and tension. The hatchling lay curled near the center, its small body trembling, smoke curling from its nostrils with every uneven breath. It noticed him instantly. Its head snapped up, eyes wild, glowing faintly with unstable fire. A warning hiss escaped its throat. Elias stopped walking. He didn't move closer, didn't raise his hands. He just stood there, letting the hatchling see him. I'm not here to hurt you, he said softly. The response was immediate. A burst of flame that shot across the stone floor, forcing him to step back quickly. The dragons above tensed, ready to intervene. But Elias didn't run. Instead, he did something no one expected. He sat down. Right there on the cavern floor, still at a safe distance, he lowered himself slowly and crossed his legs, keeping his posture relaxed, non-threatening. The hatchling blinked, clearly confused by the lack of aggression. Another small hiss escaped it, but weaker this time. Elias took a slow breath. Then he began to sing. The sound was soft at first, barely audible over the crackling heat in the air. No words the dragons understood. Just a simple, gentle melody, steady and calm, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. It echoed strangely in the cavern, weaving through the stone and crystal, carrying something unfamiliar into the tense air. The hatchling froze. His breathing hitched. Another flicker of flame sparked at its mouth. But it didn't release it. Elias didn't stop. He kept singing, the melody rising and falling in slow, soothing waves. There was no fear in his voice, no urgency, just quiet reassurance carried on each note. Above, the dragons watched in stunned silence. "What is he doing?" one whispered. Seraphira didn't answer. She couldn't, because something was happening. The hatchling's trembling began to slow. Its wings, once twitching erratically, settled slightly against its sides. The glow in its eyes dimmed, not gone, but softer. It let out a small, uncertain sound, almost like a whimper, and lowered its head just a fraction. Elias adjusted the melody, softer now, slower, matching the rhythm of the hatchling's breathing. Step by step, note by note, the chaos began to fade. Minutes passed, no one dared interrupt. Finally, the hatchling let out a long, shaky breath, and the flames didn't follow. For the first time since its birth, the cavern was quiet. Elias's voice continued, gentle and steady, as the small dragon curled in on itself. Not in fear this time, but something closer to exhaustion and comfort. Then, slowly, cautiously, the hatchling took a step toward him. A collective gasp echoed from above. Elias didn't move, didn't reach out. He simply kept singing, letting the hatchling decide. Came closer, and closer, until it stopped just a few feet away, lowering its head slightly, as if listening more closely to the sound. Elias's voice softened even further. The hatchling's eyes, once wild and unstable, began to close. And for the first time, the queen's baby dragon fell asleep without fire. Dragon. When the hatchling finally slept, the silence that followed felt almost unreal. For days, the cavern had echoed with cries, bursts of flame, and the constant tension of something on the verge of collapse. Now, there was only the soft, steady rhythm of breathing, small, uneven, but calm. Elias didn't stop singing immediately. He let the final notes fade naturally, like the last ripples on still water, careful not to disturb the fragile peace he had created. The hatchling lay curled just a few feet from him, its body no longer trembling, its scales glowing faintly but steadily instead of flickering wildly. For the first time since its birth, it looked safe. Above, the dragons remained frozen in disbelief. None dared descend, as if even the slightest movement might shatter the moment. Queen Seraphira was the first to break the stillness. With slow, deliberate movements, she descended from her ledge, her massive form casting a long shadow across the cavern floor. Each step was measured, cautious, not out of fear for herself, but fear of undoing what the human had achieved. She stopped several lengths away, her gaze fixed on her child. "It's sleeping?" one of the elders whispered, as if saying it too loudly might wake the storm again. Seraphira lowered her head slightly, her voice softer than any had ever heard it. "How?" Elias looked up at her, exhaustion visible in his eyes but calm in his expression. "It wasn't trying to hurt anyone," he said quietly. "It was overwhelmed. Too much energy, too much fear, and no way to control it." He glanced at the hatchling. It didn't need force. It needed something steady to hold on to. "A song?" Another dragon scoffed from above, though the disbelief in his tone had weakened. "You expect us to believe that sound alone calmed a creature of fire?" Elias shook his head gently. "Not just sound. Rhythm, presence, trust." He paused, then added, "And time." The queen studied him carefully, her golden eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in thought. "You speak as though you understand it," she said. "I don't fully," Elias admitted. "But I understand fear. And I understand what it's like to feel something inside you that you can't control." That answer lingered in the air, heavier than any explanation. For a while, no one spoke. The hatchling shifted slightly in its sleep, letting out a soft, almost contented sound. A faint wisp of heat escaped its nostrils, but it didn't flare into flame. It faded harmlessly into the air. Seraphira exhaled slowly, a breath that carried days of tension with it. "If what you've done is temporary," she began. "It is," Elias said gently, not letting her finish. The queen's gaze sharpened. "But it doesn't have to stay that way," he continued. "This isn't something that fixes itself overnight. Whatever's happening to it, it's not just emotional. It's physical too." That caught the attention of every dragon in the cavern. "Explain," Seraphira demanded. Elias hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Its fire isn't just stronger than normal. It's unstable, like it's building faster than its body can handle." He gestured subtly toward the hatchling. "That kind of imbalance doesn't come from nowhere." A murmur spread among the dragons. One of the elders stepped forward slightly. "You suggest there is something wrong with its blood?" Elias frowned. "Not wrong. Different." That single word shifted the mood instantly. Seraphira's wings tensed slightly. "Different how?" Elias looked at the sleeping hatchling again, then back at the queen. "I don't think it's just a pure dragon," he said. The cavern went completely still. The elder dragon's voice dropped to a low growl. "Careful, human." But Elias didn't back down. "I'm not insulting it," he said calmly. "I'm explaining what I see. Its energy patterns, how it reacts, how it builds and releases heat. It doesn't match what I'd expect from something stable. It's like two systems trying to run at once." Seraphira's expression didn't change, but something deeper shifted behind her eyes. "You speak of things you should not know," she said quietly. Elias met her gaze. "Then tell me I'm wrong." Silence. Long, heavy. Then, slowly, the queen looked away. A ripple of unease passed through the gathered dragons. "It was a risk," Seraphira said at last, her voice low, almost reluctant. "One I chose." No one interrupted. "The bloodline of my kind is ancient," she continued, "but it is also fading. Strength alone is no longer enough to ensure survival. So I sought something more." Elias listened carefully. "There are forces in this world beyond dragons," she said. "Ancient energies. Elements that existed before even we took to the skies. I bound a fragment of that power to my child, before it was born." Elias's eyes widened slightly. "You merged it with something else." "Yes. And you didn't know how it would react." "I believed I could control it," Seraphira replied, a flicker of regret passing through her voice. "I was wrong." Elias exhaled slowly. "That's not a flaw. That's just new." The queen looked at him sharply. "It is dangerous." "It is," Elias agreed. "But it's also not hopeless." That caught her attention again. "What do you mean?" Elias gestured toward the hatchling. "Right now, it's overwhelmed because it doesn't understand what it's feeling. Its body is trying to process two different types of energy without guidance." He paused. "But if it learns, if it grows into it instead of fighting it, it could stabilize," Seraphira finished quietly. Elias nodded. "Yes. And if it doesn't?" one of the elders asked grimly. Elias didn't look away from the hatchling. "Then it will burn itself out." The words hit hard, but they were honest. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the hatchling stirred. Its eyes fluttered open slowly, the glow within them faint but present. It looked around, confused at first. Then its gaze landed on Elias. It didn't hiss. It didn't flare. Instead, it let out a small, questioning chirp. Elias smiled slightly. "Hey!" he said softly. The hatchling tilted its head, studying him. Then, slowly, it shifted closer, just a little. The queen watched, unmoving. Elias didn't reach out immediately. He let the hatchling close the distance on its own. When it was close enough, he slowly extended his hand, palm open. The hatchling hesitated, then nudged it gently with its snout. No fire, no fear, just curiosity. A quiet, stunned breath escaped from somewhere above. "It remembers you, Lila." No, there was no Lila here, only dragons. But one of the younger keepers whispered the thought aloud. Elias chuckled softly. Or maybe it just remembers how it felt. The hatchling let out another small sound, curling slightly closer to him. And this time, a tiny, controlled flicker of flame appeared at the edge of its mouth, no larger than a candle flame. It didn't spread. It didn't surge. It stayed. Stable. The queen's eyes widened, just slightly. Elias looked up at her. "That's the first step," he said. Seraphira stared at her child, something fragile and powerful forming in her expression. Hope. For the first time since its birth, the queen believed her baby might live. Dragon. The fragile hope that had begun to take root in the cavern did not spread quietly. It stirred something far more volatile among the dragons who watched from the shadows. Word of the hatchling's change, and more importantly the humans' involvement, moved quickly through the mountain and beyond. By the next cycle, elders from distant broods had arrived, their presence heavy with authority and suspicion. They did not come to celebrate progress, they came to judge it. Elias felt their eyes on him the moment he stepped into the training chamber with the hatchling at his side. Their gazes cold, calculating, and deeply unconvinced. The young dragon, though calmer than before, sensed the shift immediately. Its body tensed, wings twitching slightly, a faint glow flickering beneath its scales as uncertainty crept back in. Elias noticed it at once. "Easy," he murmured, lowering his voice into that same steady rhythm he had used before. The hatchling's breathing hitched, but it didn't spiral. Not this time. It leaned slightly closer to him instead, seeking that familiar anchor in the storm. From the upper ledge, one of the elder dragons stepped forward, his massive form marked with age and battle, his voice echoing like distant thunder. "This cannot continue." The words cut through the chamber, drawing every eye. Queen Seraphira remained still, but her wings shifted slightly, a subtle sign of tension. "You have seen the change," she replied evenly. "My child is stabilizing." The elder's gaze flicked toward Elias, then back to the hatchling. "It is not stability," he said. "It is dependency." A murmur of agreement followed. A dragon heir should not require a human to function. Elias didn't respond immediately. He kept his focus on the hatchling, gently guiding it through a simple exercise. Inhale, hold, release. A small flicker of flame formed, wavered, then steadied. The difference was subtle but undeniable. Still, the tension in the room thickened. Another elder spoke, her voice sharper. "What happens when the human is gone? Will the air collapse again? Will it burn the mountain in its panic?" That question lingered, heavy and unavoidable. Seraphira's gaze shifted briefly toward Elias. It wasn't doubt, but it wasn't blind trust either. She needed an answer. Elias finally stood, turning to face the gathered dragons. He didn't raise his voice, didn't try to match their presence with force. "You're right," he said simply. The reaction was immediate: confusion, irritation. "If nothing changes," he continued, "then yes, it will depend on me. And when I'm gone, it'll struggle again." He paused, letting that settle. "But that's not the goal." "Then what is?" the elder demanded. Elias glanced back at the hatchling, who watched him closely, its earlier tension now mixed with curiosity. "To teach it how to control itself," he said. "Not by replacing its instincts, but by helping it understand them." The elder snorted softly. "You believe a creature born of fire and ancient power can be taught like a human child?" Elias met his gaze. "No," he said. "I believe it can be taught like itself." That answer didn't satisfy them, but it unsettled them enough to pause. Seraphira stepped forward slightly. "Then prove it," she said. The chamber went still. Elias's eyes narrowed just slightly. What kind of proof? The elder answered this time, his tone firm and final. Remove yourself. A sharp intake of breath came from the younger dragons. You claim it is learning, the elder continued. Then let it demonstrate that learning without your presence. No song, no guidance, no interference. Elias felt the weight of that immediately. He turned toward the hatchling, whose body had already begun to tense again, sensing the shift in his focus. That's not a test, Elias said quietly. That's a risk. All growth is risk, the elder replied coldly. Or do humans only believe in progress when it is safe? That struck deeper than intended. Elias exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He knew they weren't entirely wrong. The hatchling would need to stand on its own eventually. But forcing that moment too soon, he looked at Seraphira. She held his gaze, silent. But there was something there. Not command. Not pressure. Trust. All right, Elias said finally. The chamber erupted in low murmurs. But not like this, he added quickly. You don't throw it into chaos and expect control. You give it a challenge it can face. The elder narrowed his eyes. Explain. Elias turned back to the hatchling, crouching slightly to meet its gaze. We're going to try something new, he said softly. The young dragon let out a small, uncertain sound. Elias stood again and addressed the others. Create pressure, but controlled pressure. Heat, movement, noise. Enough to trigger its instincts, but not enough to overwhelm it. The elders exchanged glances. After a moment, Seraphira gave a single nod. Do it. What followed was unlike anything the cavern had seen before. Dragons moved into position around the edges, their massive forms radiating controlled heat into the air. Not full flame, just enough to raise the temperature, to simulate the kind of environment that would normally trigger the hatchling's instability. Others beat their wings slowly, creating shifting currents that disturbed the air and added unpredictability. The chamber became a controlled storm. Elias stepped back, farther than he had ever been from the hatchling since their first meeting. The moment he did, the hatchling reacted. Its head snapped up, eyes flashing brighter, breath quickening. The glow beneath its scales intensified, flickering unevenly. A small burst of flame escaped its mouth, larger than before, less controlled. The elders watched closely. Now, one murmured. The pressure increased slightly. The hatchling panicked. Its wings flared, claws scraping against stone as another burst of fire erupted. This one wider, hotter. The chamber tensed, several dragons preparing to intervene. Elias didn't move, didn't speak, but he watched and waited. The hatchling's breathing grew erratic, flames flickering dangerously. But then, something shifted. It hesitated, just for a second. Its gaze darted, not toward the dragons, not toward the heat, but toward Elias. He didn't step forward, didn't call out, but he held its gaze, calm, steady, the same presence, without the song. The hatchling's breathing hitched again, then slowed. Inhale, hold, release. A small flame flickered at its mouth, unstable at first, then steadied. The larger glow beneath its scales dimmed slightly, no longer surging out of control. Its wings lowered just a fraction. Another breath, another controlled flame. The chamber went silent. Even the elders didn't speak. The hatchling wasn't calm, not fully, but it wasn't losing control either. It was fighting for control, and winning. Slowly, carefully, took a step forward. Then another. Not toward the exit, not toward escape, toward balance. The heat in the chamber remained, but it no longer dominated the space. The hatchling stood in the center of it, breathing steadily, its fire contained within itself instead of bursting outward. Elias finally stepped forward. Just one step. The hatchling noticed immediately, but this time it didn't panic. It simply let out a soft, almost proud sound. Elias smiled faintly. That's it, he said quietly. Above them, the elders exchanged looks, not of agreement, but of reconsideration. Seraphira's gaze never left her child. It's learning, she said softly. The elder who had challenged Elias remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he inclined his head. Perhaps, he admitted. It wasn't approval. But it was no longer rejection. And in that moment something shifted, not just in the hatchling, but in the way the dragons saw it. Not as a mistake, not as a danger, but as something new. Something that might one day become stronger than anything they had known. Dragon. The shift in perception did not come with celebration. It came with tension. Though the hatchling had proven it could control itself under pressure, the elders were not yet convinced that such control would hold in the face of true danger. And danger, as fate would have it, was already approaching. The warning came not from within the mountain, but from the skies beyond it. A distant tremor, a disruption in the currents that only dragons could sense at first. Then came the scouts, their wings beating hard as they returned from the outer ranges, their expressions grim. Hunters. One of them reported, voice tight. Human hunters, armed with fire lances and net launchers. They've tracked the energy surges. They're coming for the hatchling. The cavern erupted into motion instantly. Dragons shifted into defensive positions, wings unfurling, claws scraping against stone. The elders barked orders, their earlier doubts now replaced by cold, strategic urgency. They cannot be allowed to reach the inner chamber, one commanded. If they capture the air, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication was clear. The hatchling was no longer just a concern, it was a target. Elias felt a chill run through him, sharper than anything he had faced so far. They're not just hunting, he said quickly. They're expecting resistance. That means they've prepared for dragons. He looked at Seraphira. If they get close, this turns into a full battle. And we will win, one elder growled confidently. Elias shook his head. Maybe, but not without losses. And if the hatchling panics in the middle of that? The thought hung in the air, unfinished but understood. Seraphira turned her gaze toward her child, who stood near the center of the chamber, watching the sudden activity with growing unease. The faint glow beneath its scales had returned, not wild, but uncertain. Could feel the tension, the rising danger. This is the test, the queen said quietly. Elias looked at her sharply. This isn't controlled pressure anymore. No, she agreed. It is not. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Human and dragon, both understanding the weight of what was about to happen. If it is to survive in this world, Seraphira continued, her voice steady but heavy, it must face more than training. Elias clenched his jaw slightly. He knew she was right, but that didn't make it easier. The first impact came minutes later. A distant explosion that echoed through the mountain, sending vibrations down into the cavern. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a low rumble followed as something struck the outer defenses. The hunters had arrived. Dragons launched into the air one by one, their roars shaking the mountain as they surged toward the entrance to intercept the threat. The cavern grew emptier, quieter, but far more dangerous in its stillness. Elias turned to the hatchling. "Hey!" he said softly, stepping closer. The young dragon looked at him immediately, its eyes brighter now, fear creeping back in. A small spark escaped its mouth, flickering uncertainly. "I know," Elias murmured. "It's a lot." Another explosion echoed, closer this time. The hatchling flinched, wings twitching, the glow beneath its scales flaring unevenly. Elias took a slow breath. "Listen to me," he said, lowering himself slightly to its level. "You've done this before. Not exactly like this, but you know what to do." The hatchling made a soft, distressed sound. "You don't have to stop the fear," Elias continued. "You just have to not let it control you." A distant roar from above shook the cavern again. This one deeper, angrier. A dragon had engaged the hunters directly. The hatchling's breathing quickened. Flames flickered at its mouth, growing larger, more unstable. Elias didn't sing this time. Instead, he placed a hand gently against the stone between them, not touching the hatchling, but grounding himself. "Inhale," he said quietly. The hatchling hesitated. Hold. Another explosion. Closer. Release. A burst of flame shot from the hatchling's mouth. Larger than before, but it didn't spread wildly. It hit the ground in front of it and dissipated. Elias nodded. Again. The rhythm began to form, not perfect, not stable, but present. Then the hunters broke through. The cavern entrance exploded inward in a shower of rock and dust, and through the smoke came armored figures, weapons raised, their movements precise and coordinated. Nets crackled with energy in their hands, designed to suppress even dragon fire. "Target confirmed," one of them shouted. "Secure the hatchling." Everything happened at once. Elias stepped in front of the hatchling instinctively, though he knew it wouldn't be enough. The soldiers advanced, weapons locking onto their target. The hatchling froze. Fear surged, real, overwhelming, immediate. The glow beneath its scales flared violently, heat rippling outward as instinct screamed at it to either flee or unleash everything at once. This was the moment, the breaking point. Elias didn't move. "Look at me," he said firmly. The hatchling's gaze snapped to him. Not the soldiers. Not the weapons. Him. "You know what to do," Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Don't fight the fire. Guide it." The soldiers fired. Energy nets launched forward, crackling through the air. The hatchling reacted, instinct rising, but this time, it didn't explode outward. It inhaled, deep, held it. For a split second, everything seemed to pause. Then it exhaled. A stream of fire burst forward. Not wild, not chaotic, but focused, controlled. The flames struck the incoming nets, overwhelming their energy fields and burning through them before they could reach their target. The soldiers staggered back in shock. "Again!" one shouted. More weapons fired. This time, the hatchling didn't hesitate. It moved. Wings flared, not in panic, but with purpose. It shifted its stance, adjusting its angle, and released another controlled burst of flame, intercepting the attack midair. The fire didn't spread. It followed its intent, precise and contained. Elias stepped back slowly, watching with a mixture of awe and relief. The hatchling wasn't reacting anymore. It was choosing. The remaining hunters faltered, their formation breaking under the unexpected resistance. Before they could regroup, a thunderous roar filled the cavern as Seraphira returned, her massive form crashing down between them and her child. The temperature spiked instantly, her presence overwhelming. "Leave," she commanded, her voice carrying absolute authority. The hunters didn't argue. They retreated quickly, dragging their injured with them, disappearing back through the shattered entrance as the queen's gaze followed them like a storm waiting to break. Silence fell again. Slowly, the tension drained from the cavern. The hatchling stood in the center, breathing heavily, but steady. No uncontrolled flames. No panic. Just controlled heat, contained within itself. Elias approached carefully. "Hey!" he said softly. The hatchling turned toward him, and this time there was no fear in its eyes. Only recognition, and something else. Confidence. It stepped forward and nudged him gently, letting out a small, proud sound. Elias smiled, placing a hand against its snout. "You did it," he whispered. Behind them, Seraphira lowered her head, her gaze softening in a way few had ever seen. "My child," she said quietly. The hatchling looked back at her, and for the first time, there was no distance between them. No fear, no instability, just connection. The elders, watching from above, said nothing for a long moment. Then, slowly, one by one, they bowed their heads, not to the queen, but to the hatchling. The heir had proven itself, not through raw power, but through control, resilience, and something far rarer, balance. And as Elias stood beside the young dragon, he realized something just as important. It hadn't just learned to control its fire. It had learned to trust itself. And that was the beginning of something far greater than any of them had expected. Dragon.